What's going on, people? Today we're about to break down episode 21 of Attack on Titan season 4, in which Eren begins the rumbling and the true origin of the 9 Titans was finally revealed. In this video I'll be explaining everything you need to know, including the hidden details about Ymir's life and the real reason why she chose to help Eren destroy the world. Before we dive into it, I know that some of you watching might be new to the channel, so if you want to see breakdowns like this every week, then be sure to smash that sub button and drop a like if you like the video. Okay, so in the last episode, Zeke tried to convince his brother to join him in the euthanization plan by taking them into Grisha's memories. He hoped this would make Eren realize that he'd been manipulated by their dad, but as it turns out, their dad was the one being manipulated by Eren the whole time. Thanks to the secret ability of the Attack Titan, Eren was able to send Grisha memories from the future, and these future memories convinced their dad to murder the royal family. In this new episode, things continue directly on from this, with Grisha transforming into a shifter and giving Frida a beatdown, not to mention squishing the Reisses with his bare hands. Following that, we eventually return to the main area of the past dimension, where the oldest Yeager brother is still trying to process what just happened. Based on everything he just saw, Zeke realizes that their dad only did what he did because he was shown specific memories from the future that Eren had chosen to send back. This manipulation is why Grisha ate the founder despite knowing he would never be able to use his power, and it's why he entrusted everything to his son, leading us to where we are now. I explained this next part in my last video, but just in case you didn't see that, Eren goes on to confirm that 4 years ago when he kissed Historia's hand, he saw the same memories his dad saw in the Reiss chapel. Among other things, it's implied that this included memories of the rumbling, which was sent to their dad by a version of Eren even further in the future. As a result, for the last 4 years he's known this destruction was destined to happen, and ever since he went to Marley he's been doing the necessary things to arrive at this end point. In this scene, however, Zeke decides to try and take back control of the situation as he orders Ymir to sterilize every Eldian in the world. Because she's a slave to the royal bloodline, Ymir begins to follow his command without a second thought, and she'll be able to actually do it once she reaches the coordinate. Zeke then correctly points out that although Eren might have seen glimpses of the future, he obviously hasn't seen everything, and this is proven by the fact that at various moments along the way, he didn't know certain things would go against him. Anyway, as Ymir edges nearer to the coordinate, Eren desperately tries to break free from the chains around each of his wrists. These chains are pretty much unbreakable considering they were made by the founder herself, but he knows that if he doesn't escape now, then the Eldian race doesn't have a future. That's exactly why he was so desperate to reach her, and after struggling for a while he pulls away with so much force that both of his thumbs were ripped off. After the opening, the anime then suddenly flashes back around 10 years earlier to a moment between Frida and Historia. As we already know, Frida would sometimes visit Historia during her childhood, and was the person that taught her how to read and write, and in this particular clip they were reading about a character who was based on Ymir Fritz. We can tell from the devil on the left page that this book isn't Ymir's real backstory, but instead it's one of the many fairy tales inspired by her over the centuries. Krieger said back in season 3 that anyone can become a god or a devil as long as people believe it, and in Ymir's case, she was considered a god by the Eldian Empire, while also being viewed as a pawn of the devil by the Marleyans. As we're about to see, the truth was a lot more complicated than that, because for a start she was just a regular girl who lived peacefully in this village around 2000 years ago. The anime briefly shows her going about her daily life getting water from the well, but unfortunately this was the day her village was invaded by a violent tribe known as the Eldians. These Eldians proceeded to burn everything to the ground and kill many of the locals, including this woman who was implied to be Ymir's relative. She was then captured as a slave alongside anyone else who wasn't killed, and they all had their tongues cut out to stop them from speaking, hence why later on they only communicate using hand gestures. One small detail is that Ymir continued the habit of not speaking even after she gained Titan powers, which is interesting because, with these shifter abilities, her tongue definitely would have grown back. At this early stage in the timeline though, she was still just a regular person, and every day the slaves were forced to carry out basic tasks like carrying water or looking after the pigs. If we pause for a second on this screenshot, you'll notice that Ymir was fascinated by this Eldian couple who were getting married, since the love these two had for each other was something that Ymir wanted for herself. In a similar way to how Eren was yearning for freedom or how Zeke was yearning for fatherly affection, what Ymir wanted was to be loved, hence why she always did things to try and please other people. This ties into what Frida said about how the girl in the book was a kind person who helped others, but in reality this desire to help others is what screwed up Ymir's life more than it already was. On one specific occasion, a slave allowed a pig to escape, and the king of the Eldians wanted to find the person responsible. He threatened to gouge out an eye from every single one of them unless someone confessed, and it didn't take long for them to all point the finger at Ymir. While it's not specified whether she really did it or not, her options were still pretty limited in this situation, and by accepting responsibility, it meant less people would suffer. Following her confession, the king declared that she was free to go, and she was sent into the forest while these Eldian soldiers hunted her for fun. With Ymir continuing to lose blood, this honestly should have been the end, but as she continued to stumble forward, her blood spilled on this flower. In Attack on Titan, this type of flower has become a symbol for being reborn, since every time it appears, someone gets a second chance at life. The first time we saw it was when Zeke was on the brink of death, only to be given a brand new body. The second time we saw it was here, just before a wounded Ymir gains the power of the Titans, and the third time we see it is later on, when after death, her spirit is reborn in the past dimension. Anyhow, in this sequence she looks up to see this unbelievable tree towering above all the others, and she walks into it because she was still trying to find a place to hide. On the inside, she then slips down into a body of water, and as she begins to drown, this mysterious creature appears out of nowhere. In the last season, Kruger referred to this creature as the source of all living matter, but whatever it is, its design is inspired by the hallucigenia. For some unknown reason, this version of the creature had the ability to titanize things, hence why the tree it lived in was so large, and by latching onto Ymir's spine, it turned her into the first ever founding Titan. When it comes to size, her shifter easily surpasses the Colossal and every other Titan until this episode, and its design was definitely more bony compared to what we're used to seeing. In the past, we've seen that spinal fluid is so important when it comes to passing down shifter abilities or creating the Titan transformation serum, and now we know it's because the power of the Titans itself literally originates from this spinal connection. Moving on. With her new shifter abilities, you'd think someone in Ymir's position would want to get revenge on the Eldian tribe and stamp them all to pieces, but instead she returned to serve under the king. As baffling as this seems, it does make sense for her character, since her Titan powers made her useful to him, which in turn brought her closer to the love she was desperate to receive. This scene takes place many years after she first became a Titan, and by then he'd been using her in various ways to expand the tribe, resulting in them now being a lot richer. Although it should be obvious to everyone that he never actually loved Ymir, from her point of view this was the closest thing she was going to get, and in her own messed up way she did love the king. Her undying loyalty is why he was more than happy to give her 3 children over the years, and these kids were called Maria, Rose and Sina. If those names sound familiar, it's because nearly 2,000 years later, the 145th Eldian king decided to name the 3 walls on Paradis after them. While we're on the topic of names, in this episode the first Eldian king refers to himself as Fritz, which is the true name of the royal bloodline that exists to this day. Although the name was changed to Reiss when they arrived on Paradis, the fact remains that all royal-blooded individuals are members of the Fritz family, and it's because of their connection to him that Ymir obeys those with royal blood. We'll talk more about the topic of blood in a second, but first we got a few clips of the original founding Titan on the battlefield as she was about to wipe out a wave of Marleyan soldiers. Back in these days, enemy nations had nothing that could possibly fight back against a Titan, and because of that, Ymir's presence made the Eldian Empire quite literally unbeatable. Thanks to her, they were able to easily defeat Marley and presumably any other nation they wanted to, enabling Fritz to keep evolving their empire in terms of manpower and infrastructure. By this time, 13 years had now passed since she first gained the power of the Titans, and despite all the different ways Fritz had used and abused her, she still did love him in a twisted way. On one occasion, as the king was addressing his soldiers, at least one of his men had been plotting to assassinate him since someone had buried the spear in the ground beforehand. Due to that, this soldier was able to whip it out before anyone could stop him, and he threw it hard enough to instantly kill the king, or at least it would have killed him if Ymir didn't make herself a human shield. Although her injury through the heart was really bad, we have still seen shifters come back from worse, but injuries like this only heal if the person has the will to live. As we can see here, Ymir's will to live vanished when she looked up at King Fritz, because in this moment he basically told her to get over it and get back to work. Until he said that, her eyes were actually open, but after hearing his final orders, that's when she no longer had the will to carry on. As she closed her eyes, this flower from before flickers on screen, and in a cruel twist of fate, her spirit is then reborn in the past dimension. In this new reality, Ymir took on the same appearance she had when she was a young slave, and as a slave she would fulfill Fritz's final orders. For the next 2 millennia, whenever one of her descendants would call on the power of the Titans, Ymir would personally be in this dimension molding each shifter by hand. It's important to remember that time also passes differently in paths, so although these shifters always look like they're being created straight away, in reality it must have felt like months or even years every single time she had to make one. Back in the real world, King Fritz had her dead body chopped up for their daughters to eat, in a scene that was foreshadowed all the way back in the end credits for season 2. At this time in history, no shifter had ever been passed from one person to another, so the king was basically trying anything he could to make sure Ymir's power didn't disappear, no matter how disgusting it might be. As the only humans with Ymir's blood in their veins, Maria, Rose and Cena were the only ones capable of inheriting these shifter abilities, and by eating their mother's spine, Ymir's Titan was divided between the three of them. This is different to the present day when normally one person eats one shifter, but because Ymir's daughters ate her spine together while in their human form, this is apparently the secret to dividing Titan powers. Gradually, the three Titans that the daughters possess grew into the 9 we know today, and in this shot we got a brief look at some of the first iterations of these Titans to exist. During the king's dying speech to his daughters, he made it pretty clear that he didn't want this age of the Titans to end, which by extension means that Ymir would never be free. Her strange love for him kept her bound to the past dimension for nearly 2,000 years, and in all that time she never tried defying him until Eren arrived. As he catches up with her, he reminds Ymir that she doesn't need to serve anyone, and that she's just a person who's essentially lost her true self. That's why he lets her know that it's her choice what to do next. She can either continue to stay here and work like she always has, or she can help him destroy the world that always treated her so badly. Ultimately, she does decide to go with Eren instead of Zeke, making this the first time she'd ever disobeyed someone of royal blood, and if we pause for a second, I'm going to explain why. Point number one is that Zeke basically thought of Ymir in the same way King Fritz did, in that he thought of her as a slave lacking free will that he could use for his own purposes. Even until the end, he never acknowledged her as a real human being, whereas from the start, Eren saw her as a person, and couldn't believe that she'd been here alone this whole time. He understood that it must have been agony to be in this realm obeying orders for thousands of years, and unlike Zeke, he tried to offer her a choice rather than simply viewing her as a tool. Point number two is that Ymir was clearly waiting for someone to free her from this pain, because after serving other people her whole life, I guess she had to be reminded that it was okay to exercise her own free will. From her point of view, lashing out at the world is clearly more appealing than spending another 100 years trapped in the past dimension, which is what would inevitably happen if she followed Zeke's euthanization plan. Now, before we move on to the amazing reveal of Eren's founding titan, there were a few bits of trivia that I thought were worth mentioning. To begin, the name of this episode is From You 2,000 Years Ago, which is a reference to the first episode of Attack on Titan, which was called To You 2,000 Years From Now. The names of these titles make it sound like Ymir sent something to Eren in the first episode, which he then received in this episode, and one interpretation is that it's referring to the memories of her life story, which he likely received when they made contact. Alternatively, it could be referring to the power she gave him to start the rumbling, or it might simply be referring to the fact that she's been waiting for 2,000 years for someone like him to arrive. Next up, earlier in the episode, Frida mentioned to Historia that she should be a ladylike person like the girl in the book, and this is what directly led to her overly kind personality that we saw in the first couple seasons. The girl in the book was called Krista, which is the same fake name that Historia used when she joined the cadets, and it wasn't until she met a Titan shifter called Ymir that she gained the courage to act as her true self. Finally, the last thing to point out is that the concepts in this episode are heavily derived from Norse mythology, whether it be the World Tree, Ragnarok, the 9 Titans corresponding with the 9 realms, or the fact that Ymir is the name of the first giant in both universes. The connection likely runs even deeper than just this, however, my understanding of Norse mythology is limited to my unfinished playthrough of God of War and the MCU. For that reason, I really can't go into any more detail, but I'm sure there is someone out there who knows all about this stuff. Anyhow, moving on to the rest of the episode, in the real world, only a second had passed since Gabi blew off Eren's head. In this moment here, the source of all living matter jumps out of his spine to connect with his brain, granting him the true power of the founding titan, thanks to Ymir's blessing. Almost immediately following this, the first thing he does is crumble all the hardening on Paradise, collapsing the walls that have been there for over a century. As some of the hardening falls down in Gabi's direction, Eren begins his weird transformation, which was unusual for a few reasons. Not only is his new titan significantly larger and more bony than any titan in history, but it also takes on a similar shape to the hallucigenia. Its bizarre appearance is the result of Eren transforming while in this condition, because the source of all living matter had no choice but to improvise and make a new body based on its own image. If Eren had made contact with Zeke when his body was whole, then I can guarantee you this centipede titan never would have happened, but because of what Gabi did, this is now the consequence. The titans in the war then begin to march, which is what Armin always predicted that Eren would do, although what he wasn't expecting was the amount of titans that would be set free. Earlier in the season, the military was planning to do a small rumbling using only the titans in Shiganshina, so Armin couldn't understand why the rest of the walls were being crumbled as well. His answer came seconds later when Eren used the coordinate in one of the most epic ways we've seen, as he was able to send a telepathic message to every single Eldian on the planet. All of Ymir's subjects were mentally taken to the past dimension regardless of where they were in the real world, and the cameos include Annie's dad, Historia, and all of the warriors. After introducing himself over the speaker system, Eren pretty much spells out why he wants to wipe out life outside the walls, and to summarize it for this video, his goal is to protect the people of Paradise by eliminating all their enemies outside the island. From his point of view, the outside world's hatred of Eldia has grown over the years, and he realized that there was no peaceful way of stopping this cycle of hatred. As long as there are Eldians, then there are always going to be those people who want to destroy them for being devils, and so in his mind, putting an end to everything is the only way to save the people he cares about. A large part of his motivation during the time skip was to make sure that Historia and the rest of his friends didn't need to inherit any shifters, since he wanted all of them to live long lives. By stopping the cycle of hatred, he will accomplish that goal, but the obvious downside is that billions of people have to die in the process. The episode ends with this ugly black and white shot of Eren's head, and this is what he looks like on the inside of this giant skull. Anyway people, that was my breakdown for episode 21 of Attack on Titan Season 4, and if it helped you understand the episode in any way, then I'd appreciate if you hit that sub button and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.